So it's great to have you all here today. Nainari Christina Minato Mutos. I'm the fourth born daughter in my family, a Binti Miu, a non-Aboriginal person, a Greek Australian born on Dharawal country in Wollongong. I'm living and working on Ghana Yatana, Ghana country. More specifically, I live in Yatapulti, Yatana, in Port Adelaide. I'm the Inclusion Agency and Programs Manager at Gowrie SA. So Mani Napudni, Ban Balya, Yelika, Gowrie SA Inclusion Agency webinar, Equity, Inclusion and High Expectations.
So Nainari Benjamin Gowrie. I'm the firstborn male in my family. I'm currently working at the Gowrie SA Inclusion Agency as a team leader, and I've worked here for 3 years. And I'm really looking forward to working with all our educators and directors this morning.
So as you can hear, we've spoken some Ganawara Yalaka, some Ghana language here today. We are honoured and proud to be learning Ganawara, the oldest living language on this earth, side by side with our Nyakantalya, Gowanu Tamaru Gurdukaburka, our dearest brother, Uncle Tamaru, red-tailed black cockatoo elder, a very proud Ghana Naranga elder, descendant of King Rodney and Mary Minato. Gowanu and I have walked country together, and he's really humbled to hear me speak and learn Ganawara. He doesn't get upset if I make mistakes, and we continue to learn from each other. I teach him a little bit of Greek and he teaches me Ghana, and we walk together side by side on this journey of reconciliation. So with Gowanu's permission, I will share an acknowledgement in Ganawara. Ghana Miyuna Nadlu, Ghana Yata Tampanthi, Yancha Mirna Nadlu, Natalia. We acknowledge Ghana people, we recognise we're on Ghana land, we acknowledge other Aboriginal and Zenith Kes people here today. My respect. I would also like to acknowledge elders, those that were, those that are, and those that will be, and honour their continued spirituality and connection to this Ghana Yatana. In my commitment to Tiati, truth-telling, I would like to acknowledge the Ghana people as the first and currently only native title holders of a capital city in this country. You would have also heard me using the term Zenith Kes to refer to the Torres Strait Islands. This is just recently been taught to us by Awa Eddie, one of the most senior Zenith Kes elders on this land. Benjamin and I are really proud to be representing Gowrie SA. We're a community-based organisation leading the development of innovative and responsive services for children and families, building leadership capacity in the wider community. Gowrie SA, as most of you would know, is the inclusion agency for South Australia, delivering free inclusion support services under the Australian Government's Inclusion Support Program. We provide assistance to all eligible early childhood education and care services to build their capacity to include children with diverse needs and backgrounds within mainstream services. The Inclusion Agency assists ECEC services to include all children by providing tailored inclusion advice and support from Gowrie SA inclusion professionals, 3 of which are joining us here today. The inclusion professionals are part of a multidisciplinary team located in both metropolitan and regionally.
So in terms of our housekeeping for today, we've mentioned that today's webinar is being recorded. So hopefully if this is something that sits well with you today, this may be something that you can go away and share with educators or share with any of your team who weren't able to make it today. We just ask that across the session, we will be using the chat box. So please be mindful not to share any personal details of children and families, and ensure you respect confidentiality from your services as well. And we just keep in mind that the chat is being moderated today. So hopefully you'll have lots to add to the session today when we pose questions as well. If across the course of a session, there's a question that either sits outside the scope of this webinar or requires a more extensive answer, our moderators will feedback that we're able to arrange perhaps an inclusion professional to contact you after the session for more information too. So We'll be able to get to all messages today. There may be the occasional message that may need a more extensive answer today as well.
All right, well, just checking in. Oh, we've got a few people having trouble logging in. That's okay. We've got the team working on that. So in today's webinar, we'll be sharing with you the objectives of the Inclusion Support Program. We will discuss the recent changes to the frameworks and what this means in practice. We'll also help you to understand your obligations to meet the requirements of the Disability Discrimination Act. So feel free, as Benjamin said, to make comments or ask questions in the chat. We've got Jade, Jess, Beck and Renee. We do have Jess as an IP, but she's not here today. Wonderful team, ready to answer any questions. So, and we'll also be sharing a little bit later on how you can engage with the Inclusion Agency if you're not already engaged. So, but like Benjamin said, it's great to see lots of familiar people here already.
And I'll just add that across the session, we'll be uploading resources. Our moderators will be uploading resources at different points of the session. So hopefully you can take away these resources back to your servers after the webinar this morning.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so the Inclusion Support Program supports childhood education and care services to improve their inclusive practices. And it does this through tailored support and funding to eligible ECEC services who need it. The Inclusion Support ISP support services to address barriers to inclusion, build capacity and capability to include children with additional needs, and of course, implement quality, inclusive and equitable practices. The program aims to provide children with additional needs the opportunity to learn and develop next to their typically developing peers and ensure all children have genuine opportunities to access, participate and achieve positive learning outcomes. So one of the first resources that we're uploading is just a fact sheet about the Inclusion Support Program.
So as Christine has mentioned previously, some of you may already be working with us. For others here today, it may be your first introduction to the Inclusion Agency. A big part of our role here at the Inclusion Agency is supporting services to plan for inclusion. So we do this by supporting services to develop a strategic inclusion plan, which is an inclusion assessment and planning tool for eligible ECEC services. So across the session, we'll be referring to ECEC services. So when we use this terminology, we're referring to our OFF services, our early childhood services, and family daycare educators or services that are attending today. So, when we're referring to the strategic inclusion plan, we are planning for perhaps short-term or longer-term strategies for improving and embedding inclusive practice based on your individual circumstances and service. So the development of a strategic inclusion plan guided by our Inclusion Agency and Inclusion Professional team recognises a service's current inclusive capacity and capability and outlines objectives for quality inclusion practices. The strategic inclusion plan will include an inclusion profile for each care environment in which the service is seeking support. So if you're a OFF service, you might have a strategic inclusion plan for before, after vacation care. If you're an early childhood service, you might have a different strategic inclusion plan for each space within your centre as well. We note that the strategic inclusion plan should be regarded as a living document, similar to your quality improvement plan, and it should be implemented, updated on a continual basis and reviewed within a 12-month period. So your strategic inclusion plan should reflect any changes and record the progress made. The 12-month review provides the opportunity for a service in conjunction with their inclusion professional to evaluate all current barriers and strategies, including specialist equipment items that are on loan from our specialist equipment library. And of course, barriers may change across the service. Across 12 months, you may have new children attend. The end of the school year, end of the year, you'll have children move rooms. So your barriers and strategies are going to change across the journey as well. A strategic inclusion plan must identify the barriers that impact on the service's capacity to include children with additional needs. It must identify strategies to address the barrier and relevant action items to support this strategy. Hopefully most of you here today are working with us in some form, and hopefully a majority here have a strategic inclusion plan in place already to support your inclusive practices. Of course, at the end of this webinar, we are going to share ways that you can connect with us at the Inclusion Agency if you're not already, and how your inclusion professional can support you on your journey. I'm just going to refer to the chat box now. We're just going to send you a resource around barriers, strategies that you can take back and support your team in developing a strategic inclusion plan. So this lists, I guess, pre-identified barriers and strategies that can support you in that planning tool, and support those conversations with an inclusion professional.
So just be mindful also, IDFM and the department are currently updating their resources. So there are going to be more updated resources available through IDFM, but of course you can reach out to your inclusion professional and just ask for any updated documents, and they can guide you where to find those. So we've been waiting for these changes for a little while, and in 2022-2023, they were released. So there's been recent changes to the approved learning frameworks with the release of version 2.0 of the Early Years Learning Framework and My Time, Our Place framework for school-aged children in Australia. Both frameworks outline principles, practices, and learning outcomes that guide educational leaders and educators in their curriculum decision-making and assist them in planning, delivering and evaluating quality programs in early childhood and school-age settings. In terms of inclusion, the principle previously named High Expectations and Equity has been renamed Equity, Inclusion and High Expectations. We also chose this as the name for today's webinar because I think it really highlights the importance of embedding inclusive practices across your settings. The expansion of this principle includes an intentional focus on inclusion. It recognises that all children have the right to participate in quality and inclusive early childhood settings, regardless of their circumstances, strengths, gender, capabilities, or diverse ways of doing and being. There's been a considerable growth in research and understanding relating to inclusive learning environments and practices for children. What's important to note is that inclusion makes visible and really celebrates the diversity of children's lives. The revision draws on new knowledge and evidence-based practice to strengthen inclusion in ECEC settings, whereby educators enact inclusion for all. As educators, we're constantly engaging in critical reflection, and we challenge practices that contribute to inequities or discrimination, and we make curriculum decisions that promote genuine participation and inclusion. So by recognising and responding to barriers, we support inclusion of all children. We've talked about the strategic inclusion plan, so this is somewhere where you might articulate that in a strategic inclusion plan. So what might this look like in a service? Feel free to pop some examples that you can think of in the chat. Okay, I'm just checking the chat. So what might this look like? This might look like flexible meal times or a staggered meal time, indoor and outdoor play being available to children so they can choose if they prefer to be in or out, or, both. accessing specialist equipment from the Inclusion Agency. So we have our catalogue that's available online that we update regularly, and this is a free service. So accessing specialist equipment might be something that you can do to address a barrier to including children participate alongside their same aged peers.
Headphones and calming spaces, absolutely.
Yeah, great response, Andrea. Thank you. Most of you have seen this image before. It's probably not a new image to you, and you would recognize that equitable means fair, not necessarily equal or the same, and that in some instances, children do need greater access to resources and support to participate in early childhood settings. We see justice in the space of early childhood education and care services about removing those barriers, and these, again, as mentioned, could be articulated in your strategic inclusion plan. So it's another great resource to have, like Benjamin said, alongside your quality improvement plan to really show how you are embedding inclusion in your service. So we might just take a moment to check in with you. Mixed age groups, so supervision and allowing all children to access resources. Open-ended materials is another suggestion.
Listening to the voice of a child, I think that's going to lead in really well to our next slide.
Yeah, it sure is, yeah. Sensory toys to support emotional regulation. Supporting children and families to have positive transitions from home to childcare and from one activity to another throughout the daily routine. Yeah, and those labels of children, that children are naughty, you know, we really want to move away from such labels where, you know, if children are neurodivergent, that is celebrated, not necessarily seen as negative, that it's actually can be a positive. And definitely challenging educators' perceptions on children's behaviour. Thank you, Erin. Progressive meal times. Changing things in the moment to accommodate needs and being really responsive. And we are going to talk a bit later on about another way that our inclusion professionals can support you in the moment, coaching and on the floor. Great, some great responses. Thanks so much, everyone. This leads in, like we said, it leads into our image of the child. What image is it that we have of children? We want to see children as active participants in their growth and development. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Child were adopted in 1989, and some of you would be familiar with these and actually display them in your services. Children's rights are a key aspect of human rights. Australia ratified these rights in 1991. Article 12 more specifically encourages us to have respect for the views of the child, and it's particularly relevant to children's participation as active citizens and learners. So when adults are making decisions that affect children, children have the right to say what they think and what they think should happen and have their opinions taken into account. And so this is done in a very age appropriate and ways that children might be able to share their opinion. We think about the capabilities of different children and how they might be doing this. It might be through non-verbal communication. It might be through verbal communication. Getting to know the child and the way children communicate with us is probably really key to that. I mean, do we ask children what inclusion means to them, or what does it mean to them to be included? How often do we take children's opinions or interest into consideration when we are thinking about inclusion? And what ways do you support children to be active citizens in their decision-making about them that contribute to their growth and development. So again, pop a few things in the chat that you can share with us, and we'll lead in really well into our next discussion, which will be the Disability Discrimination Act. Okay. All right. Well, we might lead into, give you a moment to think, but we'll lead into the next section that Benjamin will take us through.
And we've just got close. So utilising the voices and interest within their learning environments, absolutely. And I think that really connects to your programming side of, you know, the NQF too, about listening to children's voices and having that child-led program at your services. Sinead, absolutely getting them involved in the decision-making processes around experiences, meal times, risk assessments. So I love the point about risk assessments too. You know, incorporating children's voice into those is really important too.
And meal time's a really key point where we can take children's opinions into account. I think back to when I worked with children, and our cook would often serve the pasta with the sauce all mixed together. But there were some children that didn't like the pasta sauce with the pasta. So just separating the two and giving children the opportunity to serve themselves or choose whether they wanted pasta sauce or not was a really big part of their rights and acting as active citizens, so, and making that choice for themselves, and also helping with their self-help skills. I think children always want to try and do things for themselves where they can, so giving them that opportunity is really key. So their input into the program. So this, how do you do this? Do you do this through post-it notes? Do you have the program? Do you sit at the beginning of the day and make those choices together, or at the beginning of an OSH setting in the afternoon? Do you take children's voice into account for the following week's program that's going to be implemented? Allowing time for children to have their say. Jessica, I think that's so key. Just allowing moments of silence, and we're not silent now, we're chatting away, but allowing moments of silence so children can have that time to think and have that input.
I guess that conversation about, is our program for, are we doing this for us as adults, or are we, you know, changing our program, implementing these routines for children?
So Andrea, that's so true and key. Like, we don't do it often enough because we do get caught up in the routine and the ritual and the movements and the busyness of the day. And sometimes that opportunity to sit and really reflect on our practice and what we're doing just gives us a moment to think about how can we improve our practice and make sure that children are feeling included. I really like the idea, Erin, you mentioned routines and rituals. I really like that idea of making routines into rituals, that it's like when you sit down for a meal, it's like you're coming together. It's not a routine task that's so hurried and hushed. We find that sometimes it can be quite overwhelming when there's that urgency and rush into the routine, but making them into rituals is quite a beautiful thing throughout the day. Great suggestions. Thank you so much, everyone. Great. Okay. We'll move on now.
So I really love, you know, that conversation around the UN Convention of Children's Rights, and I always feel it leads really nicely into the Disability Discrimination Act too. So the Disability Discrimination Act was established in 1992. We just mentioned that the UN Convention of Children's Rights was established in 91, and the following year we've had the establishment of the Disability Discrimination Act, which we can also refer to as the DDA. So this is a law that protects Australians from discrimination based on disability. The DDA makes it unlawful to discriminate on the grounds of a person's disability. This includes discrimination that occurs in the context of accessing and participating in children's education and care services. And this is where our conversation will lead today. So discrimination in the context of children's education and care services. So again, all ECEC services, including family daycare, must comply with the DDA. So I'm going to again refer you to the chat box, and our moderators are just going to upload some really fantastic resources developed from a CEQA last year for memory around the Disability Discrimination Act, and these are designed to support services to meet their obligations under this act as well. So I really encourage you to take these from the chat box and take them back to your services, because they are really fantastic resources around this act as well.
We're only sharing 3 of the resources today, but there are a lot more available on the CEQA, and they are really important resources for us to remind us of what our obligations are to comply with the DDA.
So as we know, the National Quality Framework, or NQF, as we can refer to it, aims to raise quality and drive that continuous improvement and consistency in children's education and care services. So, hopefully today the NQF is nothing new to you. If you're working in the sector at the moment, the NQF underpins everything we do. Within this framework, equity, inclusion and diversity underpin our National Quality Framework, and it is embedded within the National Quality Standard, as well as our approved learning frameworks, My Time, Our Place, and the early years learning frameworks, which we refer to at the start of the session too. So, these concepts of equity, inclusion and diversity are absolutely, they don't sit separately to the National Quality Framework. They are absolutely embedded within these documents. Within these documents, the terms each child, every child, and all children are used to emphasise that inclusion is paramount for all children. A big part of the NQF is seeing children as confident and capable learners with the capacity to succeed regardless of their diverse circumstances. Again, we link that back to the previous slide where we talked about children's agencies and how we view children. So it is not only because the law tells us that we must include children, it's also about recognising that this is every child's right. So, when you're thinking about enrolments, under the DDA, we have that requirement to, take enrolments, but also have that conversation with your teams. Is this child attending our service because the DDA is telling us the child needs to attend, or is this child attending because we as an educator team absolutely want this child at our service as well? So again, linking back to our National Quality Framework, there's some really clear examples within our National Quality Frameworks that embed these principles of the DDA. So, Quality Area 1, when we're looking at routines, we're looking at our programs. Each child's current knowledge, strengths, ideas, cultures, abilities, and interests are the foundation of a program. Again, linking back to the previous slide where we talked about how do we listen to children, how do we, get their views on routines, how do we get their input in risk assessments, do we listen to children too? So Quality Area 1 really has that need for us to listen to children and incorporate, the diverse children, their background strengths into our program. We can also see in Quality Area 3, we talk about, what our physical space looks like. So our outdoor, indoor spaces, how do we organise these and how do we adapt to support every child's participation and to engage every child in quality experiences in both built and natural environments. So, that might be a service going back and having that conversation that around their physical space. Is it inclusive for every child? Are there things that we can change around our physical environment to better include every child? Quality area 1, so the dignity and rights of every child are maintained. So when we're looking at quality area 1, we're looking at our relationships with children. And I always feel that relationships with children absolutely underpin everything we do in this sector as well. And then we move down to quality area 6, where we talk about those effective partnerships supporting children's access, inclusion and participation in the program. So when I think of effective partnerships, I'm thinking partnerships with families, partnerships with inclusion agencies. It might be partnerships with allied health who come out to your services too. So there's many voices out there that you'll be building partnerships with when it comes to including children at your services.
When I think about listening to you, Benjamin, for example, in quality area 5, the dignity and rights of every child are maintained. I think about, for example, in an OSH setting, and nappy change facilities for children that might still be in nappies. So, where is that happening? Where is that change table? So an electric change table, for example, can be borrowed from our specialist equipment library to make amendments to that OSH environment where you would not normally have a nappy change facility available.
And it might be trainings, educator trainings to support that enrolment as well too.
And you're right, that effective partnership with families, we really consider families and parents as children's first educators and the experts in their children's lives. So having those conversations about what amendments can be made, what changes can be made to the program, to the space, to the environment is really important. Again, effective partnerships with the inclusion agency and with allied health professionals. So if you do have children with disabilities that access allied health support, what do the reports say? There's often really key suggestions in the reports that can be adapted and taken into the program.
So building on the Disability Discrimination Act, within this act we have the term reasonable adjustments when we are considering children's enrolment. So we have that responsibility to make what we would term reasonable adjustments under this act as well. So in this presentation we've included some examples here of what the DDA will consider to be reasonable adjustments, so that you can hopefully take these away to include children in your services. So these may be as simple as adjusting the layout of equipment and the environment so that children can move freely if they are using specialist equipment. We may be looking at using visual supports in the service so that children can make choices and understand and follow the daily routine. We may see educators learn Auslan to communicate with children and families. We may look at developing strategies to support children with autism access all aspects of your program. Of course, some children may need access to specialist equipment, and these can be sourced through our specialist equipment library. And if you would like more information regarding our specialist equipment library, we would encourage you to go onto our website or to have that conversation with your inclusion professional. And of course, another example may be, and we've sort of covered this a little bit today, but making adjustments to routines to allow that extra time, slowing down transitions or perhaps minimising those extended group times. But we also want to hear from you today, because we know for a fact there's a lot of success stories out in the sector of services making these reasonable adjustments. So in the chat box, I'd love for you to share some of the reasonable adjustments that you've incorporated into your service that have led to a child's enrolment or maybe a success at your service. So we'd love to hear some of the things you've put in place at your services in the chat box.
Angeline, you asked a great question there, and I think Jade put a response in there, so that's great on the spot answering, Jade. Thank you for that. In terms of most services provide foods, so you would generally be providing healthy choices within your menu at a service. So what are some of the reasonable adjustments that you've made at your service? What changes have you made? Have you made changes to your routine or to your rituals or to the choice of equipment that you put out for children to make sure that all children have fair access? Just give you a moment to think in your team. Some of you are joining us with several people in attendance, which is wonderful. And just a reminder also, this will be available, so you can share it, with your teams, perhaps even at a staff meeting.
Yeah, I can see some comments coming in now. So the furniture, resetting environments and furniture to provide more space for walkways, beautiful. Visual displays of routines, of course.
We've got our inclusion professionals have actually created some, you'll note some visuals. I've gone back to that slide. So some visuals that can be attached to a lanyard and used with some Auslan signs and the word and the sign. So these are really useful to have on hand for children that need some more visuals, some more cues to communicate.
I can see the progressive afternoon teas, and I always love seeing children serve themselves. I always feel it was something we lost a bit during the pandemic, and that we're starting to get
it back
as well.
Yes, true. Now and next cards, they're great. They're really, really useful for children that with just two simple instructions, or and even getting children to choose what's there now and what's there next in terms of routine. Some separate spaces, some quieter spaces, some quieter sensory spaces perhaps. It's great to see. We've been seeing this, I've been seeing this a lot, and actually my son's been learning a lot of Auslan at his school, and they're learning it as a language now, which is wonderful to see. So Shanae, it's great to see that you've been focusing on Auslan language in your routines and conversations. I've seen infants use Auslan before they can even speak, so it's quite remarkable to see. We have one of our amazing inclusion professionals who is a bit more fluent than the rest of us in Auslan, Jess, so it's great to see it's being used across services. Uncluttered spaces. That's a really, really great point, I think. I think we underestimate the overstimulation sometimes of a really cluttered space. So uncluttered space is a great point, Andrea. Great suggestions. Feeling cards, calm corners, sensory boxes, sensory corners, fidget toys.
Learning Gowrie language.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We love to hear that.
We do love to hear that. Okay. Some great suggestions there, and thank you for that.
So just, I guess, recapping our Disability Discrimination Act. So just, I guess, going over some of our obligations as services and educators, we want to understand what the DDA refers to, so including what discrimination, harassment and victimisation may look like within the context of a education care service. Of course, ensuring that we are not harassing, victimising or discriminating against children or others with disabilities. So considering our service operations, our policies and practices do not inadvertently or discriminate against children or other disabilities, either directly or indirectly. And of course, going back to our strategic inclusion plan, we have that responsibility to identify barriers to access and participation and put in place those reasonable adjustments, which we can see is happening in the sector, which is amazing, so that all children can access and fully participate in the service. So being critically reflective about your practices can assist you to meet the requirements of the DDA. And of course, critical reflection underpins what we do in this sector and is a big component of our exceeding themes and the National Quality Framework too.
It might be a good opportunity to go back to your staff meeting, perhaps at your next staff meeting, and maybe do some of that critical reflection with the DDA resources to think about how you are meeting your obligations as a service. Have there been times where it has been a little bit challenging, and where have you reached out for support? So I think the important thing to note as well, that although the obligation and responsibility falls on the service, there's always other services that can support you. And this is something that the Inclusion Agency can also support you with, a bit of advice and support around what's happening at your service. So, Christina, I can see you're focused. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. We are focused on light language. Installing lights and shades on the room. So children are amazed by the light and develops their imagination and makes them think deeply. Oh, I love that. Great suggestions. So we can see that you're already starting to think about how the changes, and you're already implementing some of these changes in your services. I think it really warms our heart when we see this critical reflection on and thinking about our practice and how we include children. So on that note, it's probably good to mention how when we talk about inclusion, how this can actually boost your quality improvement plan. And a key point is trying to embed inclusion across all the quality areas. So engaging with the Inclusion Agency can support your commitment to high quality practice. Having professional conversations, and this comes into quality area 6 with your inclusion professional, will support service leaders and educators to reflect and better understand current practice, as well as identify service strengths. So whilst creating your strategic inclusion plan, you'll be supported to not only critically reflect on your philosophy and community outreach practice, but it also identifies opportunities for improving quality outcomes for children, families, and educators. Now, we're going to upload this resource that our inclusion professional team have developed. If you would like a copy after it, if you don't happen to get a copy, you can always get in contact with your inclusion professional. They can come out and unpack it a little bit with you. So the strategic inclusion plan supports a service commitments to embedding inclusion in their service. So we've talked a lot about the strategic inclusion plan. It's a tool that articulates how your service has critically reflected on addressing your service's unique approach to addressing barriers to inclusion. And it's not an isolated document. It really needs to be, as we said, a live document sitting alongside your quality improvement plan, which is another live document, and your philosophy. And all of this supports high quality practice and helps you to embed inclusion across your service. So further to this, you're not going to be able to read all the writing, but the resource is available in the chat. This resource articulates what inclusion looks like across the 7 quality areas. So it's a really great document and a really great tool to use as evidence if you are starting to make those changes to embed inclusion and address the exceeding themes. Try working towards, it's quite a tricky task, but try working towards addressing the exceeding themes across the 7 quality areas. Okay, just checking in. So there's a few ways that you can engage with the inclusion agency. So generally, all services that are actively engaged are allocated an inclusion professional. So you have an inclusion professional that works with you, and they walk alongside with you on your journey and attends when needed your service. But one of the things that we as the inclusion agency can engage in is coaching, mentoring. Benjamin will talk a little bit more about this.
Absolutely. So I guess our team have undergone lots of coaching, mentoring, training to incorporate this as part of our practice. And, you're, like Christina's mentioned, you'll have a dedicated inclusion professional that will work alongside you. And the role of this coaching and mentoring is focused on the implementation of your strategic inclusion plan. So, the concept is that we identify barriers, strategies, and actions, and then we engage in that coaching and mentoring to support our services to implement the strategic inclusion plan. It's about walking alongside you. So it's, collaborating with our services, providing that advice and support in that coaching and mentoring lens. So the coaching may involve that on-the-floor support, whereby your inclusion professional might provide that practical guidance, feedback in the moment to help educators to implement new practices. Whereas when we look at a mentoring session, this might be that opportunity off the floor to debrief what's happening. It may have been a challenging afternoon, and that opportunity to sit down with that inclusion professional and unpack that and seek advice from the inclusion professional based on what's happened. So the mentoring sessions may also provide the opportunity for more broader reflection and discussion around the progress of the strategic inclusion plan, because obviously when you are on the floor, it can be hard to reflect sometimes when you are in that moment. So having an opportunity to sit down after a session can be really powerful. So generally speaking, our coaching is most likely to support those changes in educator practice, whilst our mentoring is more likely to support that ongoing critical reflection, either by individual educators about their practice, about the progress of a project as a whole. So both are important, but coaching will typically make up that greater proportion of our engagement together, so that on the floor coaching with educators, and it's going to be the most effective way to support educator capacity building in your services.
We've seen a lot of good news stories coming out of the coaching and mentoring. We've noted that just having that opportunity to have someone else, another colleague or professional, as a sounding board, and sometimes just offer that other perspective. So coming in as fresh eyes to observe a routine and just give that in the moment advice. And it might not necessarily be brand new practices. It might be just tweaking your practices that might make a difference in what's happening in your service. So have any of you been involved in coaching and mentoring? It'd be great to hear about it or get some more feedback. It'd be great actually if you have been involved in coaching and mentoring. Feel free to email some of that feedback back to us at the Inclusion Agency. We'd love to hear and also reflect on what we could do better. Absolutely. As well. So we're in that reflective space with our practice as well.
So another way inclusion professionals may be able to support your service, and I think recently we've seen a big increase in our inclusion professionals going out and facilitating staff meetings. So your inclusion professional can attend your staff meeting, again, to support educators' understanding of both the program and the strategic inclusion plan. We tend to keep these to an hour and then refer on to maybe if there's a topic that you'd like more information on, we can refer you to further PD as well too. So these can be great opportunities, again, to have that team reflective conversation and unpack what's going on at the service too. It can be the opportunity for IPs to share resources with the team and meet the team as a whole. If you would like an inclusion professional to come out and facilitate a team meeting, please reach out to either your individual IP or contact us at the Inclusion Agency if that's something you would like.
So if most of you are engaged with the Inclusion Agency, but if you're not engaged with the Inclusion Agency, feel free to download the form that we've popped into the chat again, or flick us through an email, or you could also get this request for service form from our website. Now, it's really key to highlight you don't necessarily have to have children with disabilities attending your service. This might be just general advice and support that you would like. And like we said previously, embedding inclusion isn't just about addressing the needs of particular children. It's about looking at all the children in your service. So this is a free service. Another person in your village to walk alongside you on your inclusion journey. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. We'd love any feedback, so feel free to scan the QR code and give us some feedback. If there's anything you'd like us to follow up with, feel free to pop that into the feedback form as well, and we can get an inclusion professional to reach out and support you. It's been so wonderful to have you all online with us today. We've really valued your input and discussion, although through the chat. It's been great to see that already there's some great practices happening at services, and we are familiar with a lot of your services, and we know the great and important work that you're doing. So we really value and appreciate everything that you all do.